This is the Seattle Podcasters Podcast, and I'm your host, Jason Rigdon. On this episode, I have Justin Glover from the Moral Entropy Podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a nice cloudy day over here in Pullman, so...
Oh, okay. You're on that side of the mountains. I think you're the first guest we've had who's on the east side of the mountains.
I'm infiltrating the Seattle Podcasters Podcast.
So. Yeah, we talk about it being, wider than just Seattle. I kind of said Seattle because, when you tell people who are not from this state, like on the East Coast, they're from Washington, so many times they're like, oh, DC?
Oh, man.
Like, no, Seattle.
Yep. Because I lived in Pennsylvania for a while, same thing. Everyone, oh, you from DC? Nope, Washington State. So.
Yep. Yeah, and then Washington State is so many letters, you can't get, like, your domain name is just so long. So can you tell me a little bit about your show?
Yeah, so we run, it's called an actual play podcast. So actual play meaning essentially it's actual people sitting down playing an actual tabletop game and recording it. So basically we run the D&D, Dungeons & Dragons actual play podcast where me and some friends sit down around a table. Some of them are remote and join us remotely, and we play D&D in a little world that we've created, and we just let people listen in and enjoy the ride with us, and the story that we're all experiencing together is the main gist of it.
And were all of your players like experienced in D&D, or was this ever their first time?
It's pretty much the first time for all of us. So we've been playing together for about 3 years, but the first time we all played 3 years ago was pretty much the first time all of us had ever played, and we just kind of all dove in together, and it's been really fun.
And how long have you been doing the show?
The show's been going for about a year and a half now. I think we started in August of 2017.
And has it been the same campaign and
same
characters?
It has been. They've gone through some changes. Some events happened in the podcast, and so they're still the same people at the core, but things about them have changed over time.
And how many episodes has that been?
We are at 57 episodes. I'm hoping to release 58 this week or next week.
Oh, wow. All right. And then what motivated you to start this show?
It was kind of I've always really enjoyed the storytelling aspect, essentially the cooperative storytelling aspect of Dungeons & Dragons. That's why I always wanted to try it out. And when we did finally start the getting together and playing the game, it was for about 7-8 months we played without recording anything, and then I started to think this would be really fun to share with other people, to share this story, the things we're experiencing, to let them be a part of this, because from what I understand about Dungeons and Dragons from other people I've talked to in the community, a lot of people don't get the chance to be a part of such a long-lasting group like we have. We've been really lucky in that way, to be able to play together for over 3 years now consistently. And we wanted to open that up for other people to experience in a way. It's not the same as obviously playing it yourself, but we try and let people experience that with us. We try not to edit too many things out unless it's just completely unrelated banter has nothing to do with D&D or what's happening in the game. But that's really, we wanted to share the story is the main thing. We thought it'd be really fun for other people to be able to enjoy it with us.
And had you done any podcasts before this one?
I had not. In fact, I had hardly even listened to podcasts before we started. I think I listened to one, and that was it.
So what have been some of the biggest challenges of doing this show?
I think the two biggest are, the hardest was getting the recording of everyone, making the recording clean, because a lot of D&D podcasts or podcasts in general have a lot of people, because I've listened around to quite a few. And we made this same decision at first. They tend to have a mic in the center of the table recording everything, and that just doesn't lead to very clean and listenable audio, in my opinion. And so that was the hardest thing, was figuring out how to fix that and make it clean. And so we ended up, I was able to finally find, because none of us had any audio experience beforehand. We hadn't done any of this. So I was able to find the equipment after a lot of searching. There was surprisingly few answers on the internet about what kind of equipment you needed to record everyone's voice on an individual track. But we figured that out. and we were able to get everyone on their own individual track, so I can isolate voices that are talking to make it more clear what's happening without people talking over each other. That was probably the biggest challenge. That took us several months to figure out, and some money. The second biggest one, and this is just a general Dungeons and Dragons or kind of even like board gaming group, tabletop gaming in general, is getting everyone coordinated to make it happen. Like I said, we've been pretty lucky that most of the time we're able to consistently have a game every other week. But there's been stretches we've gone for like 2-3 months with no game because schedules just didn't line up.
Yeah, it's really hard being a D&D player and having that long of a stretch between sessions. Like, I myself always forget like everything.
Yeah, that. Well, the podcast helps us remember, so that's nice. But yeah, it's also just kind of torture too, because it's so fun. Because it's a huge part of D&D for all of us is it's social time. It's guys' night for us. We're all of the guys on the podcast. So it's you kind of miss that social aspect when it's not happening for so long.
And what have been some of the biggest rewards of doing this show so far?
One of the unexpected ones for me, aside from just getting to hang out with my friends so often, my wife is loving enough to let me do that. So aside from getting to do that consistently, it's an unexpected one was creating music, because it's all original music on the podcast, and I actually do it myself. There's been a guest a couple times in there. And so that I'd never done that before either, but it was always something I was kind of interested in. And so I finally took the dive with this and went for it.
That's really interesting. Getting music for your show is always like a big challenge. So if you make it yourself, you can do whatever you want as long as you can do it.
Exactly. It's really fun to cue it up with events that are happening in the episode to kind of add to that tension or drama or humor. So,
and do you run any ads or do any like Patreon?
No, we haven't. I don't know if we ever will. I don't know if we'll ever get big enough to do that. Some of the bigger groups do that, and we've never really been in it to. I mean, it would be nice to recoup some cash for paying for website hosting and podcast hosting, but it's not hurting us too much because we split it evenly between all of us. So,
and where do you host your files?
Podbean. We use Podbean.
And how do you like them?
I mean, they're the only one I've ever used. Okay. So, but they've been pretty great. There's a few settings here and there I wish they would tweak. Mm-hmm. Like, I wish I could view each episode's like listener count without it being revealed to the entire world.
Oh, okay, interesting.
So it's just kind of weird settings like that. And I mean, not that I care if people see how many we have or don't have. It's more just like, I like to just kind of look at those things, but I don't feel like it's something that needs to be out there.
Well, podcast downloads, like, it's kind of a personal thing. It's kind of hard to share sometimes.
It's true, especially if it's low. You're like,
yeah.
Right. So.
Yeah, well, I notice even like the big guys, they will always quote their numbers, never as like average episode. They'll say total. Like, it'll always be like, oh, total downloads of all of them. And, that's a way more. Yeah, that's always the bigger number.
Definitely. And I remember reading an article a while back. It's really not indicative of how well your podcast is doing, quote unquote, for well, because that's all personal. But it's because that you could have 3,000 people download your first episode and then never download another one.
Yep. Or sometimes with an interview show, you don't have a guest on this big, and 1,000 people will download, but maybe they only listen to like 30 seconds. And they're like, oh, whatever. It doesn't really mean anything.
That's true. Yeah. It's all about that retention.
Yes. Getting people to be sticky. So what kind of microphones did you settle on?
So for cost reasons, because we needed so many, we went with, I found a nice 4-pack on Amazon a while back. They're all Tonor. I think it's Tonor is how you say it. Yeah, Tonor. They're just little condenser microphones. It was like, I think at the time it was $12 for a microphone and the scissor arm and the pop filter. Yeah. And so I grabbed 4 of them for around the table because my Behringer audio input only has 4 slots. And then the other guys that are remote, they use Blue Yeti microphones.
So then you're recording 4 people like that are present, and they're each on their own track?
Yeah, so the 4 people, so we have 4 people that are here in Pullman playing, and we're each on our own track, and then we have 2 remote players, and they record on their end and send me the files afterwards.
Okay. And then what are you using to are you using like Skype or something to get their voice to the other players?
So we have kind of a unique setup because we want to be able to see them while we're playing too.
Yeah.
So I Chromecast a Google Hangouts video chat to a big TV we have in the room.
Okay.
So we can all see them, and we have a webcam set up so they can see us. And then for audio, we use Discord because that's been the one that's been most consistent without lag. So we use 2 different programs to kind of get our setup going.
But you can use Hangouts on Chromecast. In my own group, we'd thought about trying to do this just for somebody who's on the East Coast.
Yes, you can.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You run it in your browser, and then normally it puts it in a pop-up window, but I just copy the URL from that window and put it in my main browser window.
Okay.
And then you can just cast as usual, and it'll send it right to your TV.
Oh, well, fantastic. Thank you for that.
Yeah, enjoy.
So, so then how are they getting those files? So the guys that are remote, are they just using like Dropbox?
They're recording with Audacity, and then they just send it to me through Google Drive.
Okay.
I just download them and store them away until I'm ready to edit.
And then what software do you use to edit this?
Audacity.
Okay. Yeah, and you like that?
I do. It's been surprisingly, for being a free product, it is fantastic. Like, there's not really any features that I've found in paid products that I need. Audacity covers pretty much all the things I need to do with this particular situation.
Yeah, that's definitely one thing you don't need to pay for at first, right? You need those mics. You can't do it without the microphone. So the software's free.
Yeah, thankfully. Because some of those recording software, holy mackerel, they're expensive.
Yes, totally. And so, like, how long does that post-production take?
So when I first started, it would take me, when we were using one mic, it took me like 6 hours because I would go through and amplify voices where they needed to be when it was a single track. It was miserable. But then when I finally got the individual tracks, it cut the time down to maybe 3 hours going through. So one of the reasons the editing process took so long was because when you record on different computers, you get drift. It took me forever to figure out what was happening. Apparently, the sampling rates on various computers can vary just a little bit, and it causes drift over time. So like over a 3 hour period, which is how long we play each time, so we would start at the same time recording. By the end, their audio, when they sent it to me, would have drifted like 3 or 4 seconds. It was crazy. And so that, sorry, where was I going with that thought?
With the amount of time it was taking to edit.
Yes, sorry. I'm remembering how horrible it was to deal with that.
You're having a flashback.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, so that added a ton of time because I would have to constantly adjust. And then I figured out how to adjust the tempo overall, and I was able to get it in line. And now, though, I finally figured out how to get it all. I'm down to about an hour going through, so just basically listening through the episode, silencing tracks that need to be silenced. And then beyond that, doing the music. I usually do 1 or 2 songs each episode. And that can take, 3-4 hours. So I'm still at like a 4 or 5 hour process, depending.
And how do you prepare for your episodes?
Well, there's definitely a lot of, because as it sounds like you are aware, D&D has a lot of improv to it, and you never know what your players are going to do. Because I'm the dungeon master for our group, and so it's I have to kind of figure out how to be ready for whatever they throw at me, and they throw some weird things my way. So it's I've discovered over time, it's for our group, it's better not to have like a solid, this is what will happen. I think most DMs realize that eventually for their groups. Some groups love the more railroady things, but my group does not. They tend to break out of that pretty quick. But I sit down and I kind of basically just work on the world. After every session, I'll sit down and go over, what happened in that session, how would it affect things around the world, what would they possibly like, what state does that put various parts of the world in? So I have the rough main overall story that they're moving through, but as far as like session to session stuff, it's very hard to plan for other than just know my world and understand how I think people would react.
And so you're actually playing the game, so you don't do any, like, I have always suspected that some shows kind of give hints to their players as to what's about to happen so they can kind of brainstorm a little bit, but you're actually, it's like actual play.
Yeah, no, this is very much all just off the cusp. This is pure D&D that you're listening to. So there are very few times. I think there's been 1 or 2 times where I've coordinated with a player, mainly because they were going to like step out of the session early, and so I just needed to get them in a position where I could reasonably write them off for the episode. Because I mean, when you're not recording, it's kind of like, oh, whatever, we'll just pretend you're not there at all and no big deal. But when you're telling a story through a podcast, I feel like you need to have some kind of, reasonable reason that character is suddenly no longer there.
And have you had any instance of, listeners pointing out continuity errors? I know that's been an issue in my games of like, we'll realize quite a bit later, oh, there's a continuity error here.
Not so far. I think the ones that I've noticed are well, like I said, ones that I've noticed. Like we had a moment recently, and it was months later. The party had bought some horses to travel with, and we go through months of playing later, them traveling across like a whole continent. And I realized, like, holy mackerel, we've been ignoring the horses for months. They've just been walking. So we just did like an off the cusp, like, I guess you guys forgot them somewhere. So yeah, I'm sure if people are listening, they're going to find continuity issues here and there. It's hard to manage when you have such a broad scope of random things that can happen.
Yeah, I always just thought doing the the play is that you'd have these listeners, and I would be kind of afraid of having this extra audience. The players, it's so cooperative, but the listeners is a different relationship, maybe.
No, I would definitely agree. It's I think most listeners are fairly understanding. So far, we haven't had any that have been like, whoa, back in episode 2, you mentioned this, and now you're saying this. Like, there's been a couple times I've caught myself using the wrong name for the continent they're on, and I'm like, oh, geez. But it's
magic. It's magic.
Yeah, exactly. This world is changing. But no, it does add a level of stress that it was not there when it was just us, because I want to not only try and keep some level of continuity so it's believable and entertaining for listeners, but also I want us to have an entertaining story to listen to. So there's that added pressure kind of as well.
Do you have any tips for folks that are maybe just thinking about starting a podcast, or maybe they have a brand new one?
What would I think the biggest thing is make it something you're passionate about. If it's like a passing, like, this might be a cool thing, maybe dabble with it. But if you're not super passionate about it, it's going to be hard to put out, consistent episodes. And maybe I know some shows only put out like one a month or one every other month. And so if that works, great. But I mean, if I was not passionate about what we were doing, it would be really hard to sit myself down multiple times a week to write the story, to edit, to make the music, to get the recording set up, put up every week. And it would be really hard. So, I mean, I can't even imagine being on a podcast that talks about like a single subject in multiple ways. I mean, we kind of do that, but we have a whole world we're exploring. And so I imagine people that are going to do that, you really got to be passionate about it.
And how much time do you think you spend promoting the show?
Oh, very little. It's mostly word of mouth. I use Twitter to pump the show out there a little bit. We don't have a whole lot of followers. It's, we tried a few things to get more, but I don't know. I've never been great at using Twitter, so I don't know what the best ways to find people are. It's actually a discussion I've had with a buddy of mine who also has a podcast. Like, how the heck do you find listeners? And it's frankly haven't found a solution yet, other than word of mouth. That seems to be the best.
Yep. Yeah, that's why I ask this question to everybody that comes on the show. I'm always waiting for that magical answer that we'll share with everyone.
Yeah, the silver bullet.
Yes. Let's see. And do you keep up much with like the podcast industry news?
I do not. I don't really have. I usually only dip into the podcasting like websites and such when I am looking for answers on like a technical solution. But yeah, I don't have
favorite like resources, like when you are looking things up where you're like, oh, I trust these guys or anything.
No, frankly, it's usually I find myself like neck deep in some shady forum somewhere
Mhm.
trying to understand what they're talking about.
Yeah. Once again, I'm always, yeah, that's the same thing. You're trying to find an answer and, you have three tabs open. You're like, they're all saying something slightly different. I don't understand.
Yeah, it's been a surprising thing. Like because all the guys on our podcast, we are all software engineers. So
Mhm.
we all work with computers constantly. We're all programmers. And we've all been really surprised at honestly how I think difficult is the right word. How difficult audio stuff is on computers.
Mhm.
Like in general, it's surprisingly complicated. And maybe that's the nature of it. I don't know enough about audio to say it should or shouldn't be simpler. But it feels like for a lot of these things, like the drifting we encounter and other stuff like that, there would
Mhm.
be solutions where, but there's just nothing.
And do you yourself listen to that many shows?
Um, I I have a list of maybe. Let me see here. Let me pull it up. Uh, Probably about 24 shows I poke around with pretty consistently. Um, Most of them are music podcasts. So like every week it'll be some DJ putting out music for an hour.
And how do you discover new shows?
Um, my friends and I, all of us, because we're all kind of into podcasts too since we started
Mhm.
doing this. None of us really were before, but we got into it. Uh, we so word of mouth between us. We recommend shows to each other. I also browse through lists on Pocket Casts. Is the app I prefer to use. I really enjoy that one, and it has a. I've been able to find quite a few shows on there that I've enjoyed.
And how can people find your show?
Yeah, well, I mean, usually you could search it on any podcast app, and you'll be able to find it. It's on iTunes. It's on whatever other thing you use. I'm pretty sure Podbean does pretty good at getting that out there. It's on Spotify. Or you can also go to moralpodcast.com. And on there, we have not just all the episodes, but artwork for the campaign, um, behind the scenes photos. There is a lore section people can read through and kind of understand the world. Uh, we also on the website have a little section where we review board games we've played. So, yeah, because sometimes on the off weeks, we'll play board games together and we put up our thoughts on them. So,
Awesome. I'll make sure I have the link in the show notes. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
yeah, it was great to meet you. Thank you for having me.